Hello there, it's Carly with the Expat Focus podcast. There's been a bit of debate online about whether we'll see a baby boom from the coronavirus lockdown. Is all this forced time at home the perfect opportunity to get pregnant, or is a pandemic pregnancy the last thing on your mind? If you are planning to start or add to your family, you might want to give some thought to teaching your child a second language. It's so much easier for them to pick up when they're young, right? Annika Bourgogne is my guest in this episode to talk about raising multilingual kids. She's done it herself. She's the author of Be Bilingual. She's a language teacher and an entrepreneur. And Annika recommends you research and decide on your approach to raising your child with more than one language before they come into the world. Annika, you're from Finland. How did you meet your French husband?
Well, we met when we were both in our early 20s. We met at a student party in Helsinki, where he was studying wood industry from France.
And obviously things went well and you began your life together. And this was in Finland?
Yes, I think you could say things worked out pretty good. Now this May will be 25 years from that meeting. We have two girls. We have Emma, who is 19, and Sarah, who is 14 and a half. And the first 20 years we spent in Finland. And then 5 years ago, we moved to Strasbourg to try out living in his country for a change as well.
So you were in Finland when you had kids. Did you and your husband discuss at the time when you were going to become parents how you would approach fostering bilingualism or ensuring your children were exposed to both of your mother tongues?
Oh yeah, absolutely we did. Especially since with my background, having been born in a bilingual family, but only learning to speak one language, it was really, really important for me that our kids would learn both languages. And I wanted to study it at the university for my master's thesis to find out what were really the factors that contributed into children learning actively to speak both languages.
So would you say that your interest in bilingualism really came from the fact that you, by the sounds of it, missed out on it yourself growing up?
Definitely, really definitely. So my mom was a Swedish-speaking Finn who spoke both languages as her native languages. And she spoke to her mom in Swedish, her friends in Swedish, and to me in Finnish, because my dad was a Finnish speaker. Well, that's part of the reason, I think. Also at that time, people were not that sure if bilingualism was really a good thing or not. But my mom really should have known better because she was bilingual herself. So I did feel that I really missed out on a big part of her culture, that I was not really entirely part of her world.
I can actually really relate to that. My father immigrated to Australia as a child from Malta. And when he and my Australian mother had children, they discussed whether it was worth teaching us Maltese, and he decided no, it wasn't. And fast forward, 30 years, I'm in France, and I'm like, oh, I wonder how my language acquisition may have been different, a third language acquisition, if I'd had a second language, Maltese, from when I was a child.
Yeah, I understand. But now, you will be in the situation to pass on two languages. So like me, I thought, okay, well, I'll do better with the second generation.
Yeah, exactly. So what were those discussions that you had with your husband about how you were going to expose your children to French while raising them in Finland?
At the beginning, we really thought that it was just going to be a walk in the park, that we just decided, and of course, obviously, the decision is a big part of it, but we figured that we would just decide that we were both going to speak our own language to our children, and that they would just, like sponges that, people say that children are, just automatically soak up both languages. But the more I met Finnish French families as I was doing research for my master's thesis, I noticed that it was not that easy, that there were certain things that could actually make the difference in whether or not the children learn to speak, to understand. They learn quite well, but to actually actively speak both languages, It did take more than that. So all through my studies and my master's thesis preparation, we talked a lot about the things that it was going to ask from us, that it was not just going to come automatically. And I think that we were both prepared. And even still, it kind of took us by surprise how much you need to reinforce the second language, which is not automatically in the culture around you.
So what would you say is a common approach by parents to fostering two languages in their kids, and how can they be doing it better based on what you discovered?
A lot of parents, maybe instinctively, or maybe because the language approach is so much talked about, use both their native languages with the children. For example, Gilles and I spoke our native languages. Gilles spoke French whenever he spoke to the kids, and I always spoke Finnish. To me, it was the natural approach. I've since then learned it's not the only approach. It can be it's a good approach, but it's not necessarily the best one in each situation. And the reason for that is that the minority language needs reinforcement. I mean, if you look at French and Finnish, you have maybe a hard time thinking that French would be the minority language. But when you live in Finland and you have a French-speaking parent, a Finnish-speaking parent, and the whole community that speaks only Finnish, well, in that situation, it is the minority language. So we needed to find, and this is the situation most parents in this using this approach find themselves in. We found ourselves in the situation where the kids were not going to learn French if it was only Gilles, my husband, who spoke it to them, especially since he spent quite a lot of his time traveling around the world for work. That was the biggest challenge that we had, and a lot of parents face this around the world, finding ways to reinforce the language that isn't naturally in the community around them.
And so how did you do it? How did you bring more French into your Finnish lives?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The thing is that the kids are really smart and they don't want to do anything that you force upon them. So first of all, the key is to start when they're really young. Honestly, and this is a hard thing to say right now as we're in Corona quarantine, travel was the number one thing that helped us bring up two bilingual children. Every summer we went to France, and even better than that, when the kids were about 5 and above, we sent them to the grandparents alone. Don't get me wrong, we got some pretty heavy criticism on this. We had friends who said that we were just going to getting rid of our kids and then having the time of our lives.
How dare you?
I know, I don't see what's that bad about that. No, but actually, I mean, it was obviously we were worried. It was difficult to be separate from them, even though we really knew that they were in great hands with the grandparents. But it was, I think now, looking back, it was the best thing that we could have done. Because first of all, they developed great relationships with their French grandparents. And also they were in a situation where they needed to use French. And when it comes to minority language acquisition, I think two things are key. The kids needing to use the language and the kids having a motivation to use the language, not kids being forced to use the language by their parents. That usually doesn't work, and that's not just about language. We had a French babysitter. We even had a French au pair for a while. We looked for everything and anything that was cool in French. And obviously, what is cool is a big factor and depends from one kid to the other. For Emma, the oldest, cool was everything that was linked to soccer. And for Sarah, it was Barbie. So for Emma, Gilles would would introduce her to this female soccer team in France. Later on, she actually participated in camps by this female soccer club. And for Sarah, we looked for Barbie songs, Barbie movies in French, and just going with their personality and what they were interested in. Also, the motivation. So the biggest motivation for a kid to use a language is to put them in front of another kid who speaks that language, because then the motivation to really communicate is there.
To be able to play together.
Exactly. Yeah, that's it. We usually looked for expat families. When there were recently arrived expat families from France, we'd immediately suggest getting to know each other. And the kids didn't speak Finnish yet, but they spoke French. So French was the common language. And same when we moved to France, we were recently arrived expats. And even if Emma spoke obviously French already at that time, the Finnish families here in Strasbourg immediately asked her to babysit their kids in Finnish, of course. So that worked out pretty well.
So what was the motivation after starting off in Finland to make the move to be living in France as a family?
It was the kids. It was really the kids. I felt that their French was very good. They went to a Finnish French school. We were lucky to find one, a state school, nevertheless, in Helsinki. But the older they got and started to prepare for matriculation exam in Emma's case, the less French they were using. They were teenagers, and I could see a scenario where they would use less and less French and go to the or to the extent where they would maybe not use it at all anymore. Yeah. So I felt that it would be good for them to live at least for a couple of years in their second homeland or their fatherland, because their dad comes from here, so that it wouldn't be just a holiday country, that they would actually see and live the culture more than just a couple of weeks or a couple of months a year. And obviously it wasn't very easy to sell it to them. Emma was 14 and had a lot of friends, and difficult at that age to change. But I'm sure if you ask her now, she's thrived in high school here. She has a great boyfriend. I'm sure she would say that, it was the best thing that we could have done. But at that time, it was tough.
I was going to ask if age played a part in it, because I have heard that if you want to expose your child to another language, obviously yours had it from birth, but that there is an age at which they can best acquire the language versus whether it will always sit in their brain a little bit differently.
Actually, even we adults, we can learn. If it's just about learning a language, if we really put our mind into it, we can probably learn it as well as a child learning it from birth. Of course, depends on the circumstances, but it's possible, let's say.
So is the sponge theory a myth, or is there hope for me?
Well, I mean, the sponge, first of all, sponges, they need to be dipped in water. I mean, thin air does nothing to them. But if you have a linguistically rich environment in which the sponge, the children, can dip in, then it works very well. But you do have to pay attention to the linguistic environment. But as to the age, the real advantage that kids have is, except for the fact that they're already used to learning stuff. They're learning to walk, they're learning to do so many things that their brains are geared towards learning, and they're motivated to learn the things that they need. Later on, what happens especially in pre-puberty and puberty, they start to be aware of the fact that they might not have all the words that they need, that they might sound a little different than the others who speak the language. And all of a sudden, since kids don't want to feel different after a certain age, they start avoiding to speak that language. Whereas younger kids, they don't have that at all. They just want to get the message across, whether it's right grammar, whether they have to use some creative words or whatever. So in that sense, it's great if kids can learn or be exposed to languages early on, because they're not self-conscious at that age. They just, so in that sense, the sponge is true about them, but they do need to be exposed to language and to a rich language environment.
So all those language learning hang-ups that we have as adults really start at that point in children when they're becoming conscious that they're learning.
Yeah, that's true. And especially when they're becoming conscious of being different of the others. We did have certain moments at preschool or kindergarten even, when we went there and the kids noticed that, wait, nobody else has a dad who talks to them in French. And both kids at that same time asked Gilles not to speak to them in French in front of the other kids. Can't you just speak Finnish? And, because they wanted to be like the others.
And did Gilles speak Finnish as well as French?
Yeah, he speaks very good Finnish.
Mhm. As a family, you could have very easily spoken Finnish all the time.
Absolutely, we could have just used Finnish. Actually, Gilles has a brother who lives in Sweden, and the family only uses Swedish. But we talked to the kindergarten staff, and we explained the situation, and they took out in groups. They talked about the things that the kids did at home, and then they pointed out that Emma and Sarah later on spoke 2 languages at home, and isn't that great? And wow, and could you maybe teach a couple of words to the other kids? And that was very valorizing for their hang on, that's not a right word, right? That's French. Valoriser.
Valorizing,
What's the right?
validating, socially acceptable.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I can imagine how much it would foster that social acceptance within your children and make them just feel that little bit more confident and comfortable speaking French and having
Absolutely.
a dad that
Yes.
speaks French. Yeah. So we spoke about how Gilles does speak Finnish. How difficult was it then to enforce both of you speaking different languages at home with your children? And in what scenarios would you decide this is a family meal? For example, we're going to speak Finnish. Did you speak French in the early days? Were you able to switch between languages like your husband?
Oh yeah, I was studying for my master's degree in French at that time, but I still felt comfortable talking to the kids in Finnish when they were small. I didn't even consider the fact that I could use French with them. Between the two of us, Jill and I always spoke French, but we decided that we would both want to bond with our kids in our native language. Later on, however, when I met some other families where they used, for example, French, well, in our case, they would use French all the time because both parents spoke it, and they wanted to reinforce the minority language, sort of create a haven within the house to cultivate that minority language. And we thought, well, why wouldn't we try the same thing? Because I also spoke French. And of course, when you do that, you have to be prepared to hear some criticism about your language skills. And in our case, that actually happened already when Emma was 3.5 years old. And I called her dad to ask for a piece of clothing that she had, and I used the wrong gender. And I was asking, where is this and this? And Emma would just look at me and say, Mom, why would you say le? It's la. And I was just thinking, wow, I have a master's degree in this language, and this kid is 3.5 years old, and she's correcting me. But I loved it. I really loved it. That's what I wanted to achieve.
I've heard stories like that from friends before too, with the children they babysit correcting their second language, or their toddler children correcting their language. And I find that very confronting. I'm still at a stage where I'm considering whether I want children, and knowing that my child will always speak better French than I ever will. That's quite a confronting thought. And I guess, you were studying the language, you were writing about multilingualism for a master's. You must have been very much more comfortable with that scenario than me thinking about it here.
Yeah, I do have to admit that there were times, especially when they're preteens, that it can be, can really get on your nerves, because especially since I was a French teacher as well, at some time, at times when I would make a mistake, Emma would just look at me and just use this tone of voice that only preteens and teens have, and be like, and you're supposed to be a French teacher.
Oh, the snark, the snark.
I know. But this has changed. Now that we live in France, a lot of times what comes up is when I talk to people, they often say, they ask where I'm from, and then they say, yes, you have a small accent. For some reason, yeah, this gets on my nerves quite a bit. But I mean, it's okay. I mean, it's fine. It doesn't matter. But the kids are actually quite protective of me in this respect, that when they hear somebody say it, they say, well, not really, or not that much, or it's kind of cute.
And how has your approach to languages at home and how your children look at languages changed since you all made the move to France?
Well, the interesting thing is that our minority language has definitely changed. It's now Finnish. even if the kids were 9 and 14 when we moved and had really a lot of Finnish up until then, I still continue to talk to them in Finnish. We go there in the summers, not really in the winter anymore. I've noticed that especially Sarah, who is younger, needs some Finnish reinforcement from time to time. Her Finnish is still, of course, very good, but I can see her translating. There's interference from French. She might use French word structure. She might translate some expression from French. So, I mean, they're never done. The bilingualism and the languages are never done. There's always one of the languages which is a little bit more dominating, and that's fine. It's not something that we should stress over. It's just the way it is.
I did see a Facebook post from you the other day, and you shared a shopping list that one of your daughters had written in this gorgeously cute combination of Finnish and French.
Yeah, with apero snacks also. Yeah, it's true. And I think we were talking about that, and I asked Emma, so like, what prompted you to write, for example, all the other fruit in Finnish, and then you wrote pomme in French? And she said, I don't know, maybe Dad was, walking past and said, oh, by the way, remember to buy apples. And he used the word pomme, so I just wrote pomme. So I think we were all talking, and then she just, jotted down the words that were said, or sometimes she might have found the word easier in one language. But I did notice that vin rouge, red wine, was in French, and drinks other than wine was in Finnish.
Well, that's entirely appropriate.
I know, it was very logical.
So you said that you do need to do some Finnish reinforcement with your youngest, especially since you've made the move to France. What does that look like? Do you intentionally make sure that she's socializing with other Finnish children? Do you have her in a French-Finnish school here in France?
It's a lot more difficult than when she was 4 and we had to do it with French. Because now she's a teenager and she has friends and they do everything in French. And so, yeah, there's no forcing her to do it. So again, I can just try to look for things that are interesting for her in Finnish, for example, books and things to read or things to watch online. I've been looking for a YouTuber that she would follow in Finnish, but apparently the Finnish ones are not cool enough. So they need to do something about that, because we have a lot of Finnish kids abroad who are teenagers and YouTubers.
So you must have had such a bigger resource of French entertainment when you were in Finland than going the opposite way.
It's definitely true. I really think there would be an opportunity to develop something in this respect in Finland. But what we do is we try to look for TV programs that are funny, and they're these comedies and things like that. Those are usually the ones that she likes to watch with us. And then during the summer, we try to make sure that she meets as many other Finnish kids as possible. Of course, I have been again criticized for managing her social life, but sometimes we have to try to help things along.
In 10 years, she's going to look back and she's going to thank you for this.
Yeah, exactly. That's true. The kids usually speak to each other in French, but if I go past and I said, how about it in Finnish, then they switch immediately. So it's okay. And I've asked the older one, so Emma, I said, why don't you speak to your sister more in Finnish, because I think she could benefit from that. And whenever she thinks about it or remembers it, she does that as well.
As you said, like it is continuous work. It's not something that you start and as soon as your children hit school, oh, well, they've got 2 languages, that will be fine. Like you need to keep reinforcing that. And as you said, making sure they don't forget if they're put into a different language environment.
It's true. And at the same time, I really want to take a step back and reassure parents that this is only because for us, our language goals were set very high. It's not, how would I say, it's not the only way to measure success. And the goals are not the same for each family. Because I always say that, yes, if you want to have kids who speak actively both languages, you need to make it a priority, but I don't suggest anyone making it a source of stress. because we have enough sources of stress as it is. It's not a failure if the kids only understand the language but don't actively speak it, or if they don't sound like native speakers when they speak that language. It's way, way better than what I had with a mom who was bilingual. I could understand some words, but I really, really had to learn the language when I was an adult to be able to speak it. Whereas if you even just speak your language to the kids, even if they speak back to you in the community language, they are still registering what you say. And one day, when they decide to pick it up or learn it by themselves, they're way ahead of the others who are just starting from scratch. So there's a lot of stuff that you don't see. You might think that a child doesn't speak the language, but if they understand it, and they might not tell you how much they understand, but if you speak to them, they will understand. You've won half the battle, even more than half the battle, because that passive knowledge can be built on and can be activated when the kids want it. So, just really, our goals have been set very, very high because we wanted to have the kids be able to study in both countries if they so wish. We have made some sacrifices, you might say. We haven't really traveled anywhere else. We've always come to France from Finland. Now we most often go to Finland. For us, those have been sacrifice is not the right word. Choices. They've been choices that we've made. Not everybody wants to make those changes, and that's fine.
What benefits do you think multilingualism has brought to your girls?
A lot. I would say really a lot. First of all, they've both learned the third language, English, really, really easily. And I think that comes from the fact that when you already speak two languages, you accept that the languages are different. So when you're faced with a third language that is different, you spend a lot less time asking yourself or wondering, why is this different? You just accept it and you move on. But also, obviously, the most important benefit, the absolutely most important benefit in my eyes, is that they have been able to have really just normal and natural relationships with their French family. They're able to talk with the grandparents, and they're very close. So to me, that was really the whole point of it, that they feel part of their French family. And also, they're very tolerant to any difference, whether it's culture-wise or different people. And I think this is also a side benefit from being functioning in two cultures, that you can see that there are two ways of doing things, but one is not necessarily better. Funny example of this, which is of course goes way deeper than that, but for Christmas in Finland, Santa Claus, being Finnish obviously, comes on the 24th of December and brings the gifts. Whereas in France, it happens on the 25th in the morning, right? And so when we were in Finland, we would do it the Finnish way, but more often, maybe we were in France and they got the presents the next day. And you might think that it would be better in their mind to get the presents earlier, right? But no, they one year we asked, so do you want to do it the Finnish way or the French way? We were living in Finland at that time. And they said, let's do it the French way. It's so much fun to wake up in the morning and have the present there and then have the whole day to play with them. And so I guess they get to sort of pick out the best of two worlds.
And I believe your eldest has just graduated from high school, hasn't she?
Yes, she did. Yes.
So what's next for her in her, I suppose, path to adulthood now, taking 3 languages with her?
Well, she wanted to study in Finland with the French boyfriend of hers. And since she graduated in July last year, it was too late to apply for the Finnish universities. So she decided to take a year off. They spent 3.5 months going around Asia, having a great time, learning lots. And she was supposed to enroll into a university in Finland now in the spring. Now coronavirus has yes, affected all of that.
Right.
And we might be looking at another gap year, which is okay because she was a year younger graduating than her peers in Finland. So that'll be just as if she started the first gap year now. So it was not what she planned, but she'll be fine. She'll go work and she'll study during this year elsewhere.
And do you have a little bit
No
of
problem.
pride knowing that your daughter is, gravitating back to her Finnish roots, I suppose, in wanting to continue studies?
I think I would be lying if I said no. Yeah, of course. I mean, I'm happy that their roots in Finland are so strong, but I'm so happy that they're strong also in France. I would not feel good if it was just Finland, even if it's my culture. For me, it was really, really important that they feel themselves French as well. This situation is very nice.
Just finally, Annika, I want to know what advice you would give to new parents wanting to raise their children bilingually, having gone through so many crucial years yourself now and having studied multilingualism in children as well. What would be your best tips to new parents wanting to do this for their kids?
I would say that before the kids are born, read about the subject, to read a lot about the subject together, to talk about it together, and make a decision together as to how the family is going to go about it, what language approach they will choose, and also to decide that, okay, if we're going to do this, we know there are going to be times where it's going to be hard. We know that it's going to be times when we feel like it's not working, but just keep going and make it a priority, but not a source of stress, and try to have fun. I mean, if you can link your language, the minority language, to things that are fun for the kids, then it's great. Learning doesn't have to be like school-like learning, and it shouldn't be in this respect. But just try to enjoy the multilingual journey, because it can really, really, really be an excellent aspect, like an extra aspect in your family life.
That's it for this episode. If you have any questions for Annika or want to share your own experience of raising children with more than one language, you can head over to expatfocus.com, follow the links to our country forums, or join the Facebook groups. If you want to listen to more like this, have a look through our archive for my interview with Sarah Cole on learning foreign languages. And if you like this podcast, please subscribe, share us, consider leaving us a review, and I'll catch you next time.